Hello, my friends. Thank you for joining me. I'm Kathy Rotes, and today we're going to think differently with my friend Stephen Schreibeis. I'm very excited to introduce you to him. He's a friend of my husband John and I. We've met before, but this past March we had some time at a conference to really get to know each other and learn his story. And like any person, our story is what makes us so interesting, right? Well, my friend Stephen is a superintendent for a school district out in Montana. I mean, that alone connected us because we got to experience Montana last summer at Glacier National Park. So, great conversation there, just opened the door. I thought that the interview today was going to be about thinking differently as a public school educator and superintendent. And we do talk about that. But wow, the conversation took a turn. I'm so excited for you to get to meet my friend Stephen and just think differently. Think differently about a lot. So check it out and enjoy. Well, let's start with just having you describe your roles within the public school system.
So I am currently the superintendent of Glendale Public Schools in Glendale, Montana. I never wanted to be a superintendent. I'll state that off the bat. And I'll kind of get into that here in a second. But as superintendent, basically how I see my role is I recruit, I train, and I retain highly effective leaders and educators to help create the conditions for our students to be successful in their lives. And that's basically what I do. I say highly effective because research is very clear on this. It's about highly effective teachers that are the #1 indicator of success in students. And so I will take that to my grave, that piece of research, because if we all think of educators that we had in our past, the ones that we remember the most, I would always ask them, and people listening, if you think of that person, what was it that person, that teacher did to make an impact in your life? And I can guarantee you it had to do something with relationships. It had to do with relevance. They made the content relevant. And then they were able to, once they got the relationship and made the content relevant, they were able to adjust how difficult it was for you. It's what's called an education rigor. And that's what they did. And so highly effective teachers do that. But it's not just teachers, it's also leaders in general. People, no matter what work you find yourself in, it's about being highly effective. And so there's certain things, but relationships are at the foremost, the foundation, everything. And so that's what we try to do. And that's one of my main jobs, I feel like, as superintendent, is to make sure that we are recruiting, training, and then retaining those type of people, highly effective people. I've also learned over the years that my job as superintendent is to help leaders spend more time, not just in their jobs and being effective in their jobs, but also in their lives outside of their jobs.
Isn't that what you were just saying that you need to work on?
Yeah, that's right. So, and you're hitting something that's something I've learned as being a leader is, I've always heard that saying, do as I say, not as I do. And I've always spoken against that, but I've realized that I haven't been congruent in a lot of the things that I teach. One of them is, however you want to say, if it's work-life balance, if it's, life tension, there's so many different ways I've heard of this. And it doesn't matter how you state it, but the fact is sometimes effective leaders will spend so much time as a leader on their work and forget about all the things that fill them up outside of that. So their families, hobbies, different aspects of it. It's good to love your work, but it's also good to love the people around you and spend that time with them as well. So that's also important. And so being able to do that is important. And that's something I am not only teaching, but I'm really trying to learn and live out. And it is really difficult. And it's something I will continue to probably work on, because I don't think I'll ever get it down, to be honest with you, just because my personality is, I love work. I love to work. And so I work and I work and I work and I so much so that I could easily forget my family, which is really scary and really hard to say that, but it's true. I'm really good at sectioning things off in my brain, and I can focus on the things that are at hand and block out other things. And so it's something that I know for me, I really have to work on. And I'm sure a lot of people who are listening, maybe this is resonating for them, because, sometimes that workaholic tendency that we have can become a really good positive for the business, but it's ends up being a really huge opportunity for us to grow, because it can lead to burnout. It can lead to a lot of different mental health things. It can lead to so many different things. So that's some of the things that I do as superintendent. My career started in college, actually, when my professors were trying to get me to go into education, and I said no way. They tried to talk me into it for a couple of years, and I didn't want any piece of that, because in my family I had a bunch of educators, and I didn't want to do any of that. I saw how difficult it was, and I didn't see the positives in it. I just saw the negatives of what happens in education, and so I didn't want to. And then the semester I was going to graduate, my professor finally was like, Stephen, what are you going to do? I was a math major. He's like, you're going to sit in front of a desk and just crunch numbers all day? He's like, you would hate that. And I'm like, yeah, I would hate that. And he's just like, you need to go into education. I'm telling you, you will love it. And I'm just like, I don't know. So I finally decided to do it. So it gave me another whole year of class and then a semester of student teaching. And it wasn't until I student taught that I was just like, I love this.
Wow.
And so there's been 4 times that I've absolutely been totally against something, saying I would never do it. And that was the first one, was being a teacher. So I ended up having some teaching jobs in North Dakota where I was at. Then I got my first teaching job in Nevada, where I went down there and I taught and coached. And the next thing that people would ask me is, they would say, Stephen, you ever going to be an administrator? I was like, nope, I don't want to. I love being around kids. I'm going to do this. Well, then I saw that I didn't feel like our leaders were treating the teachers and supporting the teachers the way that they should. I didn't know if I could do it differently, but I wanted to try. And so at one point I did get my master's, went into administration, got my first job at an intermediate school, which was a 5 through 8 school. And I was the assistant principal there. And I loved it. I loved being able to support teachers, to help them do it. I mean, anytime you get a position, it's the lowest level of leadership, but it does help. You have a bigger net to influence people, and you can really do a lot of really positive things. And so that was that job. Man, we could really get into some personal stuff, but then eventually we whole long story and how we moved from Nevada, but we felt a really strong pulling to get closer to family. We moved to Montana on a whim, didn't have jobs, didn't have anything, just picked up and moved. Everyone thought we were losing our minds and crazy, but we did. We picked up and moved. I got a job as an assistant principal at a high school in Montana, in Laurel, Montana, and was there for a year. We couldn't afford it. And then we ended up doing the third thing that I say I would never do, and that was move back to Glendive. Glendive I graduated from, and I am now the superintendent, and that road has been kind of a crazy one, but I was never going to come back to Glendive. And because we couldn't afford it in Montana, the only way we could is to live with my in-laws in Glendive, so we didn't have a mortgage or rent. And so to me, it was going to be 1 year, and I was out the door just to get my feet back under us here in Montana. And I was the assistant principal at the high school, was doing what I like to do, but it was a short time thing for me because I was going to move out of Glendive as quickly as I could. And then all of a sudden things changed. We started seeing that everything we had on our list of place we wanted to move was this place. And then, really long story short, I realized that it wasn't Glendive that I didn't like. It was myself. I graduated from here and I moved here my sophomore year in high school, and I really just didn't give it a chance. And I couldn't wait to get out of Glendive, and realized it wasn't Glendive I didn't like. It was me. And I didn't like who I was when I was younger. And I thought everyone else viewed me the same way as I did. And I started finding out that other people didn't view me that way. And it was really kind of healing for me, to be honest with you. And so then we decided that we were going to stay here in Glendive the rest of our lives. And so we secured that by building on my in-laws' land. And so you can't just build on their land and then give them neighbors and then sell it and give them neighbors that they never had before. So at that time we decided, well, there was the third absolutely not, no, I was never going to do is live in Glendive. And now here we are, building on our in-laws' land, living here forever. That very next year, I got a principal job at our K2 building, which was the most amazing job I've ever had in my life. I say it's the closest I'll ever be to a rock star. High fives, hugs every single day. We dealt with a lot of really hard things. There's a lot of really hard things. Kids today, it's even hard. It's harder for them to regulate. Even more so with everything going on with technology and different things. And so there was a lot of really hard things, but no matter how hard the day was, I could walk into a kindergarten classroom and those kids just, it's so fun. It was so fun. I thought that that's where I was going to retire. And then came the fourth thing I said I would never do, which was being a superintendent. I just saw that anybody that went through the system, the further they got away from the classroom, it's almost like they forgot what it was like to be in the classroom, and they're making decisions that necessarily wasn't what was best. So I never wanted to be a superintendent. Another really long story short, here I am. And I felt a really strong pull to be superintendent. I actually didn't apply for it when it opened up, and they went through the process. Didn't find who they wanted. I felt a strong pull. I'm a person of faith, and so I really felt God was calling me to do that. And I was telling him, no, I did not want to do this. I did not even apply for it. And then they had two candidates. One of them they liked, one of them they didn't. They asked another one for an interview, and they didn't think if they opened it up again, if it didn't work out, that they would get anybody. So they started getting a list of interim superintendents. So if you don't know what an interim is, it's basically just someone who will come in and fill the role until you can open it up again, usually for a year. They usually take people out of retirement in order to do that. So they were coming up with that list. And so in my head, and what was said in the board meetings, there was no way they were going to open it up again. And so at that point is when, I still felt a strong pull to go for it. And I'm like, it's not even open. So I'm like, fine, if it opens up again, I will go for it. Well, someone in our community called this candidate that was come for a second interview, told him some negative things about our community. He decided not to come to the interview. The board got confused, didn't know what to do. They opened it back up, and then I went for it. And here I am. This is my 6th year as superintendent. I still question God every single day on this, because it's not something I feel like is my strengths. I felt like my strengths was at the K2 building as a principal, and I wish I would have retired there. So part of my leadership is trying to love what I do and to grow where I'm planted. I question this every single day, but I try extremely hard, and I work as hard as I can to do the best that I can, and lots of areas I have to grow in. But I want to become a champion for superintendents. If I'm going to do this, and if this is where I'm at, how do I grow? Well, if I can become a champion for superintendents, then I'm actually going to be doing something worthwhile for our district. And so that's kind of one of my goals, is to try to do that, because I still question every single day. It's taken me 6 years. I'm still finally starting to understand this role a little bit, but then also why I'm here. I think that's been one of the most important things for me, is getting to understand, when you don't know why you're where you're at, might be your job, might be something else, something that's really difficult, and you don't know the answers right away. It sometimes comes in hindsight, and so I'm trying to search and dig and claw and mine for gold, and trying to figure out what this thing looks like, and how do I make this the best that I can, and truly love my job. Because I can say that in the last 6 years, that has not happened too many times. It's a really difficult job, and one that when you place a people pleaser in a role like this, that's not a good thing, especially going through COVID, especially going through a lot of other things that's happened. I probably went from one of the more influential people in town to one of the most hated overnight with COVID. So there's been a lot of struggles, and it's not the struggles that makes me not like this job. It's just more or less what I feel like my skill set is and what I bring and what I want to do. I love making a difference in the life of students. That's why I got into education. And so I'm getting my head wrapped around, if you remember me saying from when I went from teacher to principal, it was like this bigger net that you could influence.
Right.
As a superintendent, it's even bigger, and which is great. But I'm a high achiever trying to be a leader. And what the difference is, and I didn't realize this until like my second year of being a superintendent, was a high achiever does themselves, and they go and go and go, and they just do. They have a lot of skill sets. They in their head, they're just like, I can do anything. That's how I've been my whole life. But what a leader does is work through others to get things done, not just do themselves. They work through others. And that has been one of the most difficult things for me, is trying to make that transition, because as a principal, I could do fairly well with doing everything. I'm not saying everything on my own, but a lot of the stuff in the leadership role, I could somehow take on, work weekends, get it done. In the role as superintendent, I'm not even in a big school district. But it's impossible. There's no way. It is a job that's way bigger than me, and you have to have other people, and you have to build them, and you have to equip them, and you have to do things. And I used to always think I was a leader until I realized, oh, wow, I am in some aspects of it, but in the general sense, to be able to build up others, equip them, and have them go do it instead of me, I'm still learning that one. I'm working really hard to try to figure that out. And so that has been one of the biggest things that I've learned is that piece and how important that is.
So I know you're a learner, right? We both study the Maxwell
Absolutely.
leadership content together. This shouldn't be a surprise to you because, my gosh, John Maxwell preaches this: value others and prefer others, and develop other people. And so the whole idea of thinking differently, what is it that you were not thinking of before you were a superintendent, when you studied leadership and you knew this, but yet, gosh, it didn't hit home until you became that position? What is it that you were thinking differently about in the past that you really have had to transition over to?
Yeah, and you hit that on. Like, I teach this stuff. I
Right.
taught this stuff even before I was superintendent. But until you're in that role, and you're having to be outside of yourself, I remember being the principal at the K2 building, and I was trying to equip them, and I was trying to get them to be leaders. And there was a group that was basically our leadership group, and the facilitators of that group, I was trying to get to be more of the leaders of the group, and me being someone that goes there and is more of a facilitator, a guide, basically. Mm. And they were like, nope, you got this. You're doing a really good job. You got this. I said, no, you guys need to do this. This needs to be your school, not my school. And they didn't want any piece of that. And I said, okay, I will do this year. Next year, we're really going to focus on this. Well, I became superintendent, wasn't able to do that. And so I used to think that I was a leader, was the one who did all the hard things. John Maxwell does preach adding value. I am a big servant leader, almost too much. And I say too much. I don't think you can ever be too much. But the reason where I've been coming is, like, when hard work needs to be done, if something has to be done over the weekend, I want to serve. I want to take that on myself and not have other people do it. I've now learned about this for me. And what ends up happening is I just took away opportunities from them.
Oh, wow.
I just took away opportunities for them to grow, to learn, because I'm a big believer in, true learning is failing. is failing forward. You have to first make a mistake. I mean, I was a math teacher. The very first thing I would tell my students as math students is, well, a couple of different things. One, I don't give a crap about math. I care more about you being a better person. And so if you become a better person at the end of this, you will be a better math student. But if I focus on you being a better math student, you might not be a better person at the end of this. So I want you to be a better person because I know then you're going to do better. That was one thing I told them. The other thing was I would ask them, hey, if you went the whole year without making a mistake in this class, did you learn something? And they would say, yes. And I said, no, you didn't. You didn't learn one thing. All you did was gather information. You just got information. That's all you did. True learning happens when you first make a mistake, figure out what you did wrong, and then fix it. That's learning. And that's the concept of failing forward that John Maxwell talks about, is you have to have that failure. True failure is giving up and not moving forward. You know, you can't truly fail unless you just stop and you give up. That's failure. Everything else it's learning. It's what it is. You have to learn. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I was taking away from them, was that ability. If something was hard, I would do it. And then they didn't know. And so eventually everyone started coming to me. They would even reroute themselves. Instead of going the chain of command and going to their principal, they would come to me. Because when they went to their principal, the principal would be like, oh, I'd have to check with Stephen. Oh, I've got to check with Stephen. I became the most important person in the district, not on purpose, but because I was trying to serve, because I was trying to take things from people. I was thinking I was doing a good thing. And what I was doing was actually causing lots of issues. I was actually making it so that people thought I was the problem solver. And so they would come to me. And so they were cutting out the middleman, because I asked them and someone was like, I'm just cutting out the middleman. They don't know what to say anyways. They're coming to you anyway. So I might as well just go to you. And I'm like, no, you need to go to the chain of command. And I always send them back there. But there was a lot of different events that came up. And I'm like, holy cow, my servant leadership is actually getting in the way. Now, I'm not saying that I totally, don't serve anybody anymore. It's like a pendulum, right? If you serve too much, you're over here. And if you don't serve enough, you're over here. You don't want to be on either end of those. You want to be in the moment, what I call or what other people call the Goldilocks principle, where it's not too much, not too less, but just the right place, not only for your organization, but also for each individual person. Because sometimes you have to give more support than others, depending on the person. So you're always constantly what's called the match. You're trying to find the match for that person, or your organization, and where is the right moment. And I've realized that I was not in the right spot for our organization. I was actually serving too much. I was taking on too many things and actually making issues by not allowing them to grow. And that's part of the equipping process. They have to be able to be put in situations to where it's going to be difficult, where they're going to have to grow, which means mistakes are going to happen, and you have to embrace the mistakes. So it was really hard for me.
For you to serve less, have you just become this big jerk that doesn't do anything anymore and tells everybody to figure it out themselves? Or how did you kind of transition out of super servant?
Yeah, well, I think I'm still in this. I don't have this thing figured out by any means. So I'm still, this has been a long transition too, because I've realized some things, but you guys all know, going back in your life is something that you're working on, and you need to change. It's not this flip of a switch. All of a sudden you're like, okay, I know what to do now. I'm just going to do it. You always revert back, especially in stressful situations. You revert back to what you know, and you have the most repetitions. That's just how the brain works. And so you always have to give yourself grace. So if you are trying to do something, if it's weight loss, if it's whatever, you have to give yourself grace, because you can't just flip a switch. No one works like that. You have to understand, you have to first identify, then you have to, get a plan in place. And then you have to understand that you're going to break that plan. Like, you're going to try your best to do it, but it's eventually you're going to break it. And it's not about breaking it. It's about, what are you going to do after you break it? Like, that's the moment that's going to determine whether or not you as a person meet your goal or not. I always tell people to picture a point on a page and then another one up from that. And if you draw a line, that's what people think it's going to be, this nice, easy line. I'm here, I'm going here, I'm just going to have this line. And that's not how it is. You go up and you get better, and then you go down, and then you go up, and then you go down, and you go up and you go down. That's how it is, no matter what you're talking about. If it's a teacher working with kids' behaviors, whatever, that's how it goes. You want the trend line of that graph, the up and downs, to go up to that point. That's what you want. And we have to understand this. We have to give ourselves grace in order to be able to do that. And so with me in this transition, I'm constantly having to give myself some grace. And it's hard because I'm a perfectionist. I want things to be perfect. And it's not. That's not how life is. It's messy. We are constantly having to make mistakes. We're constantly having to do things that we don't want to do. We're constantly having things happen that we had no idea was going to happen. Life throws us curveballs all the time, and we have to adjust. And so it's not going to be perfect. It goes back to that pendulum. A perfectionist, those are the people you want to have on projects that you need to have a job done really well. The downside is there's lots of downsides to that. For one, they probably would pour too much into that. It's really difficult for them mentally to do things, especially if you have curveballs coming at you. And so it's an opportunity for everyone, especially for me. And that's kind of what I'm learning right now is this process. It is really difficult. It's really difficult, but one that's really important, because I think it's really important that we as leaders model what we preach. Not just do as I say, not as I do, but to actually do what you're saying they need to do. And I have been finding out that I've been so non-congruent with what I say. And so I've taught all this stuff, but actually living it out is a little bit more difficult, and one that I have to give myself some grace for, but also strive to get better at every single day.
Well, maybe now you have your own personal stories to go with this training that you can continue to preach and teach to people instead of John Maxwell's stories or somebody else, good leader that you had. It's you, it's your stories. Could it be too, you mentioned earlier how our brain goes back to what it knows. So it goes back to old habits until a new habit is fully formed. Could it be that the jobs you had in the past, you figured them out? You figured out how to be successful. You figured out that pinnacle, and now you're back at a spot that you're working toward figuring out. And that's probably best for your brain and your body, right?
Absolutely. And that's actually something I've always said. Like, I'll never be amazing at anything, but I can be good at no matter what I do, because I thrive on challenges. I love adversity, even though at times I don't like adversity. Right. But so usually once I get to a certain point where I feel like I'm starting to get it figured out, my brain goes to something else, and it's the next challenge. And this is the first job that I've had where I'm like, wow, this is bigger than me. And in the last 6 years now, but definitely in the last 4 years, when I've started figuring this thing out and what I've been really striving to work on, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, this is my growth area. And these stories that I'm getting are going to be my stories instead of having someone else's. And it's actually part of my growth plan, to be honest with you, is this. That's how I got my mind. I teach a concept called flipping it. You take a negative and you turn it into a positive. So whatever that is, you flip it. So if you're starting to think negative, it's okay to think negatively for a while, but you have to get past that, and you have to eventually flip that and think of the positives in the situation. Otherwise, I mean, life is just too difficult without that. And plus, it's not going to help you get any better. So how do you look at the positives? But, I had to really look at my situation and say, I didn't want to be a superintendent. I mean, I don't know how many times I've said that in the last 6 years. I never wanted to be a superintendent. And it's almost like my go-to saying. And I don't know if that's just me giving myself an out because I know that it's above me, or if it's just me trying to get my head wrapped around it still, but I'm trying to get that out of my vocabulary, except with telling a story, not, that I think is fine, but I'm trying to get to the point where I used to say this, and now I'm so happy that I'm a superintendent, and this is what I did to change that. And because if I can get my head wrapped around this piece of this, and then I could start being a champion for superintendents. Once I get to there, I know that I'll be the leader that the school district needs. And so all of these things that are happening and all the things that I've dealt with, this adversity, the things that I've dealt with, my own personal story, just like everyone listening has their own, this is how I become a champion for superintendents. This is how I become a person who loves what they do, even though when I got into it, I did not love any piece of my job. But now I'm looking for the way. I'm trying to flip it. I'm trying to mine for the gold in the situation and find the things that I do really like about this job, because there are. And how do I spend more time doing that and understand my strengths and equip the people around me to do the things that they're skilled at, to where aren't necessarily mine? And how do we shape this into a team effort instead of me viewing this thing as I'm the leader, I'm the one that needs to be doing this, I'm the one that needs to be doing this, type of mentality, even though in reality that's not necessarily what I was saying, but my actions were showing that that's what it was. That's what I was doing, was me doing those things. And so I've just learned so many lessons, and I think everyone can kind of reflect on the things that, and if you aren't, you should reflect on the things of, what you want versus what is actual reality. What are you actually doing? What are your actions actually showing? I mean, one quick example for me is at the end of my life, if I was able to come to my funeral, I know this is kind of morbid, but I think it's a really good thing to have the end in mind and think, like, what do I want people to say about me? I want people to say, wow, he was so loving. He just served other people. He really was there for other people. He truly loved others. That's what I want people to say about me. But yet my actions show that I want people to say, wow, he was a really hard worker. He worked all the time. And that's not what I want people to say, but that's what my actions show. And I had to come to that realization too. In one of my evaluations of my principals, he was a board member of our community college here. And he said that, because we were talking about life balance in our evaluation, and he said he was coming back from a board meeting, saw my vehicle still at work. He turned around, went back to work, because he didn't want the superintendent to outwork him. That's what he said. And the hardest piece of that is, in my head, and I didn't say this out loud, but in my head, I was like, yeah, right, like that will ever happen.
Oh.
and in that moment, I realized, what in the world? Why would that thought even come into my head? Well, that's when I realized, oh, wow, I want people to say this about me, but really my actions and my thoughts are actually doing, I guess, I wouldn't say the opposite, but to get people to think that, oh, wow, he was a hard worker. That was more important to me. That's the thought that came. And it really resonated with me, because I've been trying to get my admin to spend more time outside of work and with their family. I say family is the most important thing, but yet they're constantly like, well, Stephen, you need to spend more time too. And that was the moment that I really realized that they were absolutely right.
So what are your little kind of mind tricks for yourself that you're doing or using to get yourself to walk away from work, to take family time or vacations, but more so when you are there, how are you there? Like, because I get it. My brain's the same way. I love to work. My brain is constantly thinking creatively and what else I could do. And So how do you remove yourself and have the balance, or at least give yourself the opportunity to create the balance and truly be there when you are with family or doing something non-work related?
But I think with my personality is really difficult. And maybe I'm just trying to give myself some grace here, but it is really hard for me to not be thinking of work. I mean, in my life, my priority, if I was to state it out, it is God, family, work. That's what it is. In reality, it's work, family, God. I mean, and so that becomes part of my growth plan, actually. I mean, I have this on here and what I'm going to do in order to do that. And I'm still working on it. And I'm going to get better every single year at this. And I have been, and I am not anywhere I want to be, but some of the things that I've been doing is the biggest trick, I think, is to, like, in work, we schedule our time.
Yeah.
Right. We put it on our calendar. And so our calendar ends up controlling our lives. And so one easy thing that people can do is you should schedule the things in your calendar first that are the most important, that are your priorities. So if God is my number one, what do I have in my calendar that shows that? And if I don't have anything in there, I need to get that. If that's just, I think John Maxwell calls it chair time, whatever that is. If it's God time, if it's just self-reflection time, if it's whatever it is, do you have that in your calendar? Then if family is the next one, do you have times, not just family vacations, but do you have other things set up? You know, if it's your spouse that you want to spend more time with, you have a date night, do you have date nights with your kids? Do you have, is all of that stuff on your calendar? And then once that's in there, now you can schedule your work stuff instead of your work stuff dictating whether or not you can spend time with your family or not. And I think that's one that's been a life changer for me. There's a book called Simplify that I read that kind of really hit home on that, and love that book. And so that's one that I think is a really important one. Another one is just being present. I think you kind of mentioned this a little bit, is when you do finally get that. I truly don't think that there is such thing as balance.
Right. I agree.
I don't think it exists. I don't mind people using that. It's not like I have to say, well, that doesn't, because what they're saying is, they're trying to get to a point to where they are fulfilled in a way. Right. I mean, we all have to work to make money. I mean, my kids always ask me all the time, why do you have to go to work? I'm like, well, I need money so we can do the stuff that we do together. I mean, it's still an important part. I can't have the house. I can't have these things without this. So work is important, but it's not so important that you take away from others, especially the people who are the most important to you. So how do you do that? I think the calendar is good, but also once you get there, because there's times where, like right now in our district, it's a work season for me. I've heard people talk about it as seasons. I've heard about it talked about as tension, but it's really a work season. It's hard, but I've also, even though I still took some time because I made that a priority. And this is the first time that I've been really making it a priority, and it's been hard. But I think testing it is really important, because it's almost like you feel like you can't leave work and you have to be working all the time. And so you have to test that. Is it really going to implode with you not being there, or you not getting the stuff done? Is it really going to change that much? I think testing it, and I think that's what's been happening, is me, even though logically I know that it's going to be fine without me, I know what the things I need to get done. And I'm just like, well, who else is going to do this, or who else is going to do this? And this is why equipping is so important, is you have to, like, recruiting people, hiring people, training them, getting them to understand their duties so that you can leave. If it's all like, if I get hit by a bus today, this school district's going to continue to move on.
Yep.
With or without me. Did I set them up for success, or did I set them up for failure? If they'll still be fine either way, but am I making their lives better or worse once I'm gone? And that is a decision that we all have to make, that I want this thing to be totally fine with me being, if I get hit by a bus, they're good. And
But
I think
isn't that the goal of a leader? That you're truly not going to enable the organization to fall apart if you weren't there. You're creating your replacement.
right.
That makes for a great leader, right?
That's right. If you basically work yourself out of a job,
Right.
you become the most valuable person in that district.
Now, granted, that's humbling when suddenly they can forget about you because somebody else is ready to take your place. But you're right on. That is every leader's job to empower and to equip and to develop their replacement. Because you don't want to see an organization go under ever.
No, and it truly is. And it's something that in the last year I've been working on and probably thinking about more so than anything else, because none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. And so we
Right.
don't know when this is going to happen, but we're also not guaranteed tomorrow just in our jobs. Usually leaders, it's a little bit different. You don't have a whole lot of tenure. You don't have a whole lot of, things. I mean, one day you might be the best thing in that organization. The next day it might not be that way. Things shift very quickly, and leadership is tough, and it's one that's ever changing. But to be able to empower and equip the people around you so that it's not about you, it's about the organization and the success of that organization. I think it's one of the most important things that we do as leaders. And
Isn't that servant leadership right there?
that becomes servant leadership. I think it's a different definition, right? Because I think what I had in my head was me doing things for other people. Like, if I'm going to be a servant, I'm going to do things for others. And that, I think, was the biggest shift, is me understanding that, okay, that's part of servant leadership. I mean, I was literally sitting in our boardroom with another one of our employees, and we were doing an online job fair. And I had wanted our custodians to paint the boardroom. And so they had to take the TV down from the wall. And they came in while we were doing this, and they asked, hey, can we do this while you're in here? And we're like, yep, that works. And there was only one of them there. Well, I used to work at Best Buy putting TVs and stuff up on the wall and in people's homes, and I did all this stuff, and so I know a lot about it. And I knew he wasn't going to be able to do it by himself, and so I'm like, hey, do you want some help with that? I'll help you. I get up out of my seat away from my computer and I start going helping him, and then it dawned on me, my job is being paid to recruit these people. His job is to go do this. I was just trying to help him and not have it be seen as it's beneath me, because I just want to help people. I love helping people. And so I was wanting to do that. And I was like, oh my goodness, I am actually taking myself out of the job I'm supposed to do to help someone else in the role that they're supposed to do. I'm not helping the situation. And that's when I really started understanding. This was probably 4 years ago when I really started understanding, wow, servant leadership isn't just doing things for other people. It's setting them up to do things for themselves that only they can do. And it's not, and me understanding my role. And my role as a superintendent, I am now realizing, is to really set the conditions. And it's very similar to me as a teacher. I tell teachers this all the time. A teacher's job is to set the conditions for learning to happen for each individual student.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
It's what, if some students are super, they come, they just really book smart, they understand things, so you are setting the conditions, and so you're trying to make it to where it's not too easy and not too hard. But a lot of those kids, they come to school and it's just super easy and they just get bored. Their job is to amp that rigor up so that there's there. Versus the opposite side of this thing, kids who really struggle, they are trying to set the conditions for that student to be successful. And so you have to then change your task, change how you do things in order for that student to be successful. Well, as a leader, it's the same thing. We're trying to set the conditions for the organization or individuals to be successful. And that's the piece that becomes servant leadership, because now we are serving them in a different way of getting them to be successful. That's been the big shift of me understanding the difference. And I think that hones in on the same thing of being a high achiever to a leader. I think that's that's the pieces I was missing. I just thought me doing it was helping. And I realized that that's not necessarily the case.
Well, I went into this conversation with you thinking we were going to talk about thinking different as an educator. And yeah, no, the theme of this is thinking different as a servant leader. What powerful revelations. Thank you, because you've been able to articulate your revelations and your transformation through this servant leadership that I can totally connect with. I'm working with an organization right now that our whole theme this year is servant and being a servant leader. And we will absolutely be taking this podcast for everybody to listen to because you've visualized it so well for me. It's not about what we're doing and how we're almost enabling people because we take on all the work. It's about equipping and developing the people and the organization. That's
And giving
beautiful.
them the tools to be successful. But the big piece of it is allowing them to fail. Like that is like literally the hardest thing for me, because I just want people to be successful. And I thought that that's what that meant, was taking away their hardships. That was going to get them to be successful. And I was totally wrong. You can't be successful without the pain and the suffering of making mistakes and having to learn from that. That's the only way to truly do that. I see it. And what's weird is I've complained about this with parents for I don't know how long, but didn't see it in myself, because parents are doing that to their own students.
Right.
They
Right.
want to, you've heard of helicopter parents where they're just basically hovering around. They won't let the kids do anything because they're just right there. And then there's lawnmower parents who are just trying to mow down everything before the student, to make it as easy as possible. And those kids are not going to be as successful when they eventually get on their own and they have to deal with adversity. They're not going to know how to deal with it because they didn't have the adversity before. And so even though I complained about that with parents, I didn't realize that I was doing the exact same thing for my leaders.
Well, now you know.
And now I know. And now the hard part becomes, the first step is knowing. The next step is to make a plan, and then to keep to it, and then to adjust. Because like we said before, I'm going to make mistakes in that, and then I'm going to have to reflect. And so that goes to, I need a team that's going to come and have a conversation with me when they see it. And so we talk about this stuff all the time. I mean, if you were to do a podcast right after this with me not talking to anybody, and you had one of my principals on, they would be able to tell you all of this stuff, because I tell them this. I think the number one most important things that a leader can be is vulnerable. They have to be able to be vulnerable. And if you can't be vulnerable, you're not going to form those relationships. You're not going to have that stuff. And it's really difficult, because by being vulnerable, it's like you're putting your heart out there, and it's going to get crushed. It will happen. Like, you're going to get hurt, but it's through that process that you're going to make the relationships, and you're going to be able to have that trusting environment to where you're showing that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not be 100% on point all the time, because I mean, who are we kidding? We can't even be. So right. If we're trying to get other people to do that, we're not being congruent. And, it's important to make sure that other people understand that, and you're modeling that as well. That's okay to make mistakes, because that's where learning happens.
Okay, so right on, you were talking about the 4 things you said you never were going to do. And now you've done them. I can't help but ask, what's the next thing that you're never going to do? Because I'll be interviewing you in the future when you do tackle that never going to do project.
Well, I've told myself I will never say never again, because there's things that I've said that I started saying I would never do, and I've caught myself and said, at this point, I am not thinking that this is the best route for me, because people have told me different things too. Like, people tell me I need to get into politics, and I'm like, instead of saying I won't ever do it, I'll say that is not something I ever aspire to, and I hope that that's not one day what I end up doing. But right. But like, I think Yeah, I've learned not to say never. Well, I'm trying. I understand I shouldn't say never. I can't really say I've learned it yet because I have had situations where but I still every once in a while will revert back to it. So I don't know if I've truly learned it yet, but I'm in the process of learning. Maybe it's a better way of saying it.
Well, I love how transparent you've been in your walk, in just the struggle in life, because every one of us has a similar walk, maybe not to superintendent or politics or whatever, the road, but we all do have that struggle in life where we just don't feel ready, and then we don't feel equipped, and then we don't want to be there, and then whatever, wherever that takes us. So thank you for being transparent right in the middle of your journey. I I love it. Um,
Absolutely. And I think it's something that a lot of people don't know if they can be leaders because they think it needs
right.
to be perfect and it needs to be this. And I think if more people were able to actually share their struggles and what they actually go through, I think it would allow for others to see that, wow, everyone is human. Everyone has different struggles, but we all have struggles. And it's not really easy, but it is so worth it. As hard as it is at times, to be able to be there for other people, to be able to work with others. I mean, it's so important what we do as leaders. And I love how John Maxwell says it is leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And so because everyone influences someone, that means everyone's leaders. And so no matter where you are in your walk, you are a leader. And to really hone in on that, I think is really important. It's just really important what we do.
Yeah, I couldn't say it any better than that. That's so true. Thank you for using your influence, especially in a school district, to be able to affect so many young people where there's such a need these days.
I appreciate you having me on.